We're off to the races, as they say. So welcome, everybody. This is our 40th webinar, which I still find hard to believe, but it is. And I'm really excited today to be doing this with Therese Longo, who's been a colleague now for some years and who's doing some really cool work with her and her colleagues at Radcom in Ohio, and a training and development firm, which is becoming a performance consulting firm in a big way, which is really cool also. But we're going to have a conversation after sort of a brief introduction by me to what we're going to talk about here. And I will probably turn off my picture just to get me out of the way a little bit, or maybe I'll stay there. But anyway, this is the power of accomplishment-based job profiles. And we're going to be talking about individual performance maps as a foundation for this kind of work, which is why I have it on the sort of front slide here. So before we get into it, as you probably know, and if you don't, we have a YouTube channel at performancethinking.tv. We'll get you there. And we post these webinars usually 48 hours or so after the webinar. So this webinar will show up live on our YouTube channel. But in the meantime, you're here to join us. And hello, everybody. I see some nice comments in the chat. If you're watching it on YouTube, if you're now watching the recording, of course, we'd love it if you would subscribe, if you'd share, if you'd like, if you make comments. We always appreciate that to get that kind of feedback. And also, I want to let you know about upcoming webinars. It wouldn't necessarily be in this sequence, but one of the topics that's come up with one of our longtime colleagues is sort of expanding what we think about when we talk about consequences beyond tangible and monetary kinds of compensation and such. We're going to talk about sales enablement again, which is a field that we've been involved in for decades, frankly, but some updates on that. Talk a little bit about exemplary performance and upside potential, what Tom Gilbert called performance and potential for improving performance, which has a lot of implications for how we do analysis and design of interventions. And then at some point, we're going to talk about change management. This next month, on April 17th, I'm pretty excited because we're going to be talking about decisions as valuable accomplishments. Now, maybe that's a very obvious one for people, but one of the things that we've sort of noticed over the years, a lot of times people think decisions are behavior. But if you think about it, you go through the exercise of making a decision, but then when you have a decision, it's a really valuable accomplishment. We're going to talk about the implications of that next month. So here's the agenda for today. I'm going to provide a bit of an overview, just enough for those of you who may not be familiar with our work about accomplishment-based performance improvement, and then get pretty quickly into performance mapping with a focus on individual performance maps, which are really the foundation for accomplishment-based job profiles, which is the main topic here. And then we'll give some examples of those kind of profiles, things that we and our colleagues have been doing on and off for quite a few years, but Therese and her crew have really dug into this in a big way. So that's going to be fun to talk with her. Talk a little bit about the notion of accomplishment-based talent development. And I'm quite excited about that because we've been talking about and working on that for years. But I recently had a request from Talent Development, or TD magazine, the publication of the Association for Talent Development. And I submitted a draft to them at their request of an article about accomplishment-based talent development. And so we'll see if it gets accepted. But I think we could we could make some waves with this, let's put it that way. And then the main event here is Therese and I are going to have a conversation about her experience and her colleagues' experience about doing this kind of work with accomplishment-based job profiles. So just to sort of provide the context, most of you know, and certainly anybody who's been through our programs know, that Tom Gilbert really established the foundation for most of what we do. And in his very famous book, published in 1978, but still taught in graduate programs around the world and used by colleagues in its maybe third or fourth edition now, Tom made this very strong statement, which was, in the great cult of behavior, he called it. And he didn't mean behaviorists or anything like that. He meant all of us, leaders, training professionals, professionals involved in human performance, we historically tend to look at behavior and talk about behavior. But he said in the great cult of behavior, behavior itself is viewed as an end rather than as a means to an end. But we must enable people to produce accomplishments, the valuable products of behavior. So Tom said this in 78. I'm very grateful, was kind of a mentor of mine for about a decade toward the end of his life. But I and many people in the field of human performance improvement or human performance technology took to heart this notion that we should be focusing on the products of behavior, because that's how people contribute value to their organizations. If there's been a slight change that we've made in this, it's that we talk about work outputs. Because if you look at the field of performance improvement, or if you look among applied behavior analysts or organizational behavior management folks, OBM people, they often talk about accomplishments. But what we've noticed over the years is that very often there's quite a mix of how people talk about it. Sometimes they're talking about what we would think of as organizational business results, things like revenue and such. Sometimes they're talking about sort of small deliverables. A lot of times they're talking about the completion of things with passive verbs. But I don't want to know what the completion of behavior is. I want to know what it produced. So we, instead of arguing with people about the best definition of accomplishments, we coined a term that we use in our programs and with our colleagues, work outputs. And it's not a brand new term. People have used versions of that over the years. But the emphasis is that we're talking about the product of something. And in the world of work, of course, that's work is the behavior, if you will. And outputs, notice it's plural, the emphasis being you can count them. And that's perhaps obvious, but if you look at the field, again, you'll see things like information and other things which can't be counted. We don't know what the unit is. So we emphasize that accomplishments, defined as work outputs in our language, are countable nouns. They're things. Now, if you're interested, and I will make this available, we published an article some years ago that I can share with you, and you can download this, what it really means to be accomplishment based. And we talk about some of the implications of this in this article. And so take a moment if you want now to download it. If we move on and we don't have a chance for you to click on that, you can go to performancethinking.com and look in the resource library and find this article. But it talks about the ramifications of being accomplishment based. Now, this is the model we use to talk about performance. And we say there are basically three elements of performance. There's behavior, of course, but there's valuable work outputs or accomplishments that we can define with what we call criteria for good. Like, what is a good decision? What is a good document of a certain kind? What is a good relationship? In other words, we can take each output and define what it means, what the specifications are for it to be considered a good one. And then, of course, those contribute to organizational level business results. And then there's behavior influences, which are all the things affected. Now, this work is focusing on the work outputs, so the accomplishments. That's what we're talking about today. And Gilbert had a very interesting perspective on this. He talked about the worth of an intervention. And by that, he meant a training program, a job aid, a new system, whatever it was, something trying to improve performance. And in line with his view that accomplishments are the valuable products of behavior, he said the worth of an intervention is equal to the value of the accomplishments that it produces or increases divided by the cost of behavior. Now, in today's terms, that would be called return on investment or ROI. And I think it's a really important conceptual framework because it says, wait a minute, it's the accomplishments that we care about. Now, we, of course, have our other part of our approach, which is the 6 boxes model. It's been around now for a long time. I kind of created it out of Tom Gilbert's behavior engineering model back in the 80s. But that's how we make sense out of behavior influences, which are the things that support or maybe get in the way of behavior that hopefully produces work outputs or accomplishments that contribute to business or societal results. Now, we could go into great depth, and our programs do, but that's the essential features of what we teach people. And I'm always kind of proud to say, even though it was a small group of people, that the 6 boxes model in particular, which has been around for a long time, was voted by a bunch of our colleagues at the International Society for Performance Improvement at their annual conference in 2022 as the best performance model in the world. And I think that might be stretching it a little bit, but I think what people like is how practical and straightforward it is. So I want to shift into the notion of accomplishment-based performance mapping. And the way we teach it, or the way we talk about it, is that, first of all, there's organizational relationship maps. And many of you are probably familiar with that. You probably can't even read this one because it's very fine detail, but you don't really need to. Gary Rumler and his early protege, Carol Panza, were the main influences on our work from this. But what this picture is, it's a whole organization. It's a behavioral health organization that we were working with about a decade ago. And inside the gray box are all the departments and functions inside that organization. And then outside of it, the yellow, bluish, and green boxes are outside influences or groups, whether it's customers or regulators or whatever, who also have influence. And if you zoom in on that, you would see that these departments or functions or groups pass things around, which are accomplishments. And so at the core of this, in Rumler's work and Carol Panza's work, are the valuable things that get passed around at the organizational level. Now, if you zoom in a bit, you get to process mapping, which is another level. And this is a very simple process map. One of the things I think most people know is that process maps typically have the behavior or the activities or the steps in the boxes. And they don't always have the work outputs or accomplishments. But what we've done here is highlighted the accomplishments or the outputs of each of those steps. So we focus very much on process mapping, but being sure that at each step in that process, we understand what the valuable product is. Because that's what, that's where the value is, as Gilbert pointed out. So organizational relationship mapping, process mapping, those are pretty familiar to a lot of our colleagues. Something that we've introduced, and I don't think anybody else has ever quite done it this way, is what we call individual performance maps. And they define jobs and individual performance. And we use them in our coaching program as a tool for having conversations with individuals when we coach them. But we also use them when we're doing performance analysis and design because we want to understand roles. And so that's going to be the starting place for our discussion today. And here's a few examples. Here's a director of human resources. And what you can, and this, notice, so this is the old name. It says customer diagram worksheet. We used to call it a customer diagram, but it's an individual performance map. And what you see there is the HR director. And this was an HR director in a small and growing medical devices company some years ago that we worked for. And around the sides are the customers. That is the people, individuals, or groups to whom the HR director delivers valuable things. And the bulleted list are things, they're outputs, they're that person's accomplishments. And this is pretty much this person's whole job. Here's an example from the behavioral health world. And I don't notice in our attendees whether we have some people from the behavioral health world or applied behavior analysis, which is what this was. And you, again, might not be able to read this, but notice there's a lot of stuff in this. So the clinical supervisor, a board-certified behavior analyst, delivers these things to the behavior technicians, the clinical director, the parents of the clients, the clients themselves, human resources, and so forth. And again, all the bulleted items are the outputs of the clinical supervisor. And notice self on there, because there are some things that any one of us who work produce for ourselves that are also very valuable. I would be dead without my calendar, for example. I would have big trouble, or to-do list. And so some of our outputs we actually deliver to ourselves. So this is a moderately complicated job. The blue highlights there are to highlight in this particular application when we were doing this, that this person delivered the same outputs or outputs with varying degrees of development to different customers. We then have a vice president of marketing and sales. And this was in a small and growing venture capital funded tech company. So one of my favorite parts of this one, this VP was delivering stuff to her CEO, the investors, the external customers, and to the product development team. And I love the one of the investors, a compelling reason to invest. And that was a very important output of hers, as you can imagine. You're trying to get the next round of funding, and so to do that, you need to document, this is why you should invest in us. And of course, a lot of these are other things like market analysis or new customers and so forth. But those are outputs of a VP of marketing and sales. And what these examples are intended to demonstrate to you is that you can take any job, literally, and you can do this. You can define the outputs, and the whole job can be on a single screen or piece of paper. Now, from this kind of analysis, you can create a whole lot of different kinds of documents and tools. And this is a partial list. But for example, if I'm doing a hiring interview and I have a definition of the job that I'm hiring into that's based on work outputs or accomplishments, I can say, well, have you ever created a strategic plan, for example? And how did that go? And what was it like? And da-da-da-da-da. In other words, I can have behavioral interview questions based on the accomplishments that people had to produce, or job descriptions that aren't just marketing documents. And you're going to see some of these today. They're helpful in a whole lot of other things beyond just getting a person in the door. Or what Teresa will talk a bit about, because she and her team have been doing a bunch of this, job ladders. In other words, you got, let's say, engineers at various levels. Well, how do we define levels 1, 2, and 3? What are the differences in the outputs or the contributions that they make to their organizations? Or for example, during hiring and onboarding, you can build performance tests or performance-based assessments. Can you produce a machine that's adjusted to specifications? Can you produce a good hiring decision? Let me give you a little exercise to produce an improved treatment plan if you're a clinician, et cetera. So you can do performance-based assessments. You can have onboarding where you say, okay, this is all of the accomplishments or outputs we expect from this job. What do you got to be up to speed on first? The first day, maybe, first week, first few weeks, first month. So you can stage the work outputs over time. And human resources, training, coaching, management can all work to help you get up to speed on those in a real onboarding effort. You can do succession planning in the same way. You can say, we have a strategic role, a vice president of operations, let's say. And what is that person's outputs? And we've got a candidate to replace that person. What does this person need to get so they can produce to be a successor? Accomplishment-based learning and development plans. We help produce those in our coaching program, et cetera. And then the last point that I have there about helping people see the value. Sometimes we have a separate slide with this, but if you think about it, if you can have a conversation with somebody who works with you or for you and can say, this requirements document or this decision or this widget or this session note is really important because it contributes to perhaps revenue or regulatory compliance or whatever. People kind of wake up about that. And so they begin to see the value. So there's a lot of things you can produce based on individual performance maps. Here's an example. I love this one. This is I was working with a group of people to certify practitioners in a large Dubai organization years ago. And it's one of our earliest and most interesting examples, really. And this is one of these sort of oil-funded companies that has something like 60 different businesses. And a woman named Tracy McGowan at that time was in our program, and she had a fairly senior role there. And she went out and did an analysis of what they called the level 2 manager. And you can't read this easily. It's kind of small text. But if you go down the left there, it says required work output, strategic plan, set of standards, clear expectations, and so forth. What to me was stunning about this example is that across all of these different kinds of businesses, from service businesses to the local Nissan dealer to a bank that they had an investment in to all kinds of different businesses, all of the level 2 managers in this company, no matter what their industry, had to produce these outputs. And so this was part of a larger, more conventional job description that I really liked. And you can see the modified individual performance plan map there on the right, and you can't read it very well, but the orange stuff are the business results that go along with these outputs. Here's an example from an HR outsourcing company where this is quite old, actually, where somebody who became one of our biggest contributors, he was certified to deliver both our practitioner program and our coaching program. And he and his company began to create what they called ideal performance profiles. And this is for a payroll specialist. And what you see there is down the left, the outputs, payroll, responses to questions, proactive recommendations. And then you see what we call criteria that I made some reference to, which means how do we know it's a good one? And these are the characteristics that define that. Here's one that's it's 2 of 5 pages. These things can go on in great detail depending on what your purpose is. But here we have on the first page a summary, areas of performance, and then within them outputs. And then the page on the right there is one of several pages where the outputs are drilled into with criteria in quite a lot of detail. Here's an even more detailed one. This is the first page of I believe our colleague Shane Isley produced this some years ago. And this is for Director of Office Administration. And you begin to see the other things that you can put in here. You can have who they report to and who their customers are and a summary, conventional summary. And then you start to see the work outputs, the criteria, what business results these contribute to, and then possible ways to measure that. And this is one of something like 11 or 12 pages. It goes on and on. Great detail. I'm not always convinced that it's worth organizations maintaining giant versions of these, but it depends on your purpose. And this is a beautiful example, actually. And then here's one, and we'll be talking about this or similar ones a little bit later, because this is from Teresa's company. And this is sort of the summary page for one role, an instructional designer level 1. And you can see that it has sort of a conventional description, and then talks a little bit about the kinds of things that often go in job descriptions, which are, what's expected in your education experience, preferred education, preferred certifications, etc. And then it has a short list of outputs at the bottom, and could be followed in great detail. And so that's the output part that we're talking about here, or accomplishment part. And so I want to emphasize that defining jobs with work outputs or accomplishments is way more powerful than competency-based job descriptions, because you can actually count and tally and give feedback about specific accomplishments. And the list is not infinitely long, as you saw. You can summarize a whole job on a page. And again, the traditional thing of sort of competency or even skills-based is kind of subjective in many cases. We can measure accomplishments or outputs. And we can even look at talent development, talent management, this is actually a graphic in the draft I submitted to Talent Development magazine. But this is a entire talent development, talent management process that starts from recruitment, where we can, as I mentioned earlier, we can define jobs, we can create performance tests and behavioral interviews, all anchored to accomplishments. And then we can do onboarding, as I mentioned. We can bring people up to speed in the first days, weeks, and months on the job based on accomplishments. And then we can build specific training or whatever it is we do to be sure people are really ready for their job. And then we can put them into a process of ongoing coaching, which becomes an ongoing, continuous, agile talent development process, where there's a cadence of meeting between an individual and his or her supervisor or manager functioning as a coach. And they talk about, let's see what output we should talk about now. What can we improve, or what should we add to your capabilities for the next big project or for your next career step, what have you. And then we can use that process to make pretty database decisions about things like promotion, transfer, maybe moving up to be the manager of another team, compensation, and so forth. So you can build the entire talent management, talent development process around accomplishments. So that's my story, so to speak. That's the overview. And so I'm going to stop the slides here and introduce my dear friend. Let me just find how to stop them. Therese. And Therese, can you? All right. Hi, Therese. So
hi.
So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your company? I think that's the easiest way to do it.
Sure. So I started as an instructional designer probably 20 years or so. I've been working for Radcom about 8 or 9 years now. I'm their VP of operations, and we're a consulting company. And like you said earlier, we started as a training and documentation company, and now really do consider ourselves a performance improvement organization. And so that's our primary focus. And the way that we can help clients improve performance are through performance analysis and training and development and technical documentation. So all of the things that we do kind of fit into that bigger umbrella of performance improvement. And I think that was one of the ahas I had when I started to learn about performance, was that it is more holistic and it gets to solving all the problems that people have around performance, not just knowledge and skills.
Yeah. Well, and of course, to me, you're like one of the stars, frankly, because, we're always talking about getting out of the training box, and like doing what you just said. And when did we meet? 3 or 4 years ago, something like that? I don't remember, but it's been
Probably
a while.
Yeah.
Might be longer than that. And Therese was in our open practitioner program. And then over the years, 5 or 6 of your colleagues have gone through. So you're building this whole team of
Yes.
performance consultants. And, we talk a lot about that. And we've worked a lot with big companies where we go in with a training department and they want to become performance consultants. And we do that. But you're actually the first or maybe the second company, that started out in the fairly traditional training and documentation business, and now are doing performance consulting. So that in its own right gets me excited. And then the other thing is, I think you've really taken on this whole thing of doing job profiles with accomplishments. So that's where I wanted to start and ask you if you could tell me a little bit about how you got started in this whole job profile thing that you do.
Sure. So yeah, after I got certified in the practitioner program, we started, looking for clients where we could do performance analysis. And I think we did maybe one performance analysis. And then all of a sudden, it was around the COVID time, we had 3 clients, existing clients, that had issues around retention or job classification. And it all happened at the same time. And I remember them coming to us and saying, can you help us with this? They had competencies or lists of skills and knowledge, and they needed a framework. And I remembered, seeing the job descriptions that you had shared in class or in other webinars. And I thought that could be a model that I could really use to create a framework for doing career pathing or job classification. And so it was new, but I liked the challenge. And so we kind of started to just wing it for a while and just built out these job descriptions that were accomplishment based. And so, over time, we got better at helping clients understand what accomplishments were. And I think over time it's evolved. The product has evolved, and we'll talk more about that.
That's one of the things that's really cool about all this from my perspective. I think we're at the beginning of this. And as the examples that I shared illustrated, a bunch of our colleagues have done this in various contexts, sometimes for their certification, projects, sometimes for other things. But you guys are really turning it into kind of a product or service line. And my take on it, I trained as a behavior scientist. I basically think of the world as our laboratory. And it seems to me that you're deep into a laboratory just discovering all of the applications of this. And I remember, was the first one where you had those engineers where people were trying to define what the levels were? Did that kind of evolve from where you started? I don't remember.
So actually, we started with an organization that was having issues with retention, an insurance company. And they were trying to build out some career pathing.
Okay.
And then the second one was the job classifications. It was a municipality, and they were working with union folks, and they needed to reclassify the jobs. And so they wanted a good way to create the job descriptions, but also to be able to evaluate them. So by doing it accomplishment based, we were easily able to define the accomplishments, define the criteria of the accomplishments, and then create evaluation sheets that allowed them to see, could they actually produce the accomplishment? And so they were able to use that then to sort out roles that were they were technician ones, and they were trying to move into 3 different roles. So then they were able to evaluate and then reclassify people into those 3 roles.
So those 2 examples both could go in.
Yeah.
Is the first one, as people probably read if they pay attention to LinkedIn or training and development, one of the big employee engagement things is, do I have the opportunity to develop? And so that first case that you described, you can show people the path and you can say, yeah, you do. And here's the stuff you have to get good at. So to me, that's a whole thing in its own right that you can pursue, right?
Right. And when I did that project, then when the third one that you were talking about with the engineers came along, it was a very easy sell, so to speak, because I'd already been doing it. I had the model. And when they came to us and said, hey, we have these engineers, we have engineer 1, 2, and 3. They were having trouble defining the role in a way to help people progress through the roles and to provide the opportunity to learn the skills and knowledge and be able to produce the accomplishments. So again, I was able to apply that same model and defined all the accomplishments for the engineers. And then we used the Miro board and sticky notes and redefined some of the roles. They changed the titles a little bit. They added new roles. And then because we did it accomplishment based, all we did was take each accomplishment and apply it to the appropriate level. And what was nice about that too is we were also able to define like stretch outputs. So if I'm an engineer 1, what are some of the first outputs that I need to start learning to move into that level 2? And then we, created the job descriptions from there. And the original job descriptions for that job really just had the accomplishment, the output, the criteria, and the high-level behaviors or tasks.
Mm-hmm. And you can use, that's the thing that I'm also struck. I looked at your examples and others, how probably you've then added different stuff depending on the purpose, right?
Right. So as we continue to work with this client, I kept thinking, there's more information around performance that I think would be valuable for someone who might be moving into a level 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the engineers. And so my table kept getting bigger. And then it became more than anything, an updating issue or, so then I had the idea, if I just create a sheet for each output, then I can have a little bit more room, more real estate to add other information that is valuable.
Yeah.
And so I think from there we've added, depending on the use and the client, we change it a little bit, but we can add the business results. We can add what processes are involved, what are the interactions or the relationships, what are the measures, and even on some of the behavior influences.
Yeah. I mean, as I listen to you, of course, I think accomplishments are the solution to a lot of things, but imagine trying to do that in a skills-based or competency-based way. I don't think you can do it because you're giving people this really clear ladder or roadmap about what it is and in a definable way, right?
Right. And I think that was the aha moment for the client as well, because what they came to me with initially was this Excel spreadsheet that had a bunch of skill. Well, it was a hodgepodge of things. It had skills, it had just names of software, it had deliverables. And so they had this big spreadsheet and all the different layers and the different levels, and they didn't know what to do with it. And I think the insurance company was the same. It's like, we have this big spreadsheet, we have all the skills and knowledge and the competencies, but what do we do with it? And because it doesn't provide a really precise, clear way to define the performance and measure it, they get stuck.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, as you're talking, I'm reminded of that I've been concerned about from the beginning of this is kind of a version of scope creep in the sense that, as you said, you can start adding stuff to it. And that's great. It's all useful information. But it's also true that if you were going to be a big company and you had an HR organization need to maintain those, like, how do we decide how big it should be and how, and what the applications are? I think that's something we're going to have to learn more about.
Right. It didn't allow them either a way to organize it very well, or to sequence it.
Yeah.
So I think those were two key areas where this framework or this approach by using accomplishments allowed us that flexibility to organize it better, define it better, and then leverage it for so many different things.
Well, there's a couple other things you said to go back to what you initially said about the two projects you started with. One is the second one involved the unions. Now, that is stunning to me because I've had a lot of clients, both in the US and in Korea, for example, where the company was trying to deal with the unions and they just couldn't because there were a lot, the standard things. It's a sometimes adversarial process. And we could probably spend a whole bunch of time talking to you about how this worked, but it seems to me that because accomplishments and outputs, the way we define them, are so much clearer, it would be hard to get in. It might be easy. Let's put it this way. It might be easier to avoid arguments with the people in the unions about what the job is. What was that? How much did you interact with the union folks?
So we didn't interact at all with the union. But I think because this change was desired by the union, I think it was a pretty smooth transition because the union workers were disgruntled because they all had the same title, but they all had the same pay. Mm-hmm. And so there was no way to differentiate the levels. And so they finally realized originally they thought that was a great thing, but then they finally realized that, if Joe over here's not working very hard and I'm, really working hard and we're both making the same amount of money and have the same title, that's not really fair. So I think the negotiations with the union went fairly smoothly because it was something that they wanted.
Well, and that goes straight to Gilbert's notion that accomplishments are the value, because I can work my tail off, I can exhibit a lot of behavior. The question is, what do I contribute? And so it seems to me what the discussion you just mentioned, whether it was stated in these terms or not, was, oh, wait a minute, we can distinguish how much value this job contributes if we focus on the products of behavior. Is that fair?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And we were able to measure it because we provided the criteria for a good one.
Yeah. And you don't have to argue over whether that person has strategic thinking or not. That's
right. Right. And we won't go down that road quite yet.
So there's a lot of directions we could go here, but I'm wondering if you just you talked about how it's kind of evolving. What are some of the big, takeaway insights that you and your colleagues have come to as you've done this work with clients?
I guess the biggest insight is that, and again, like you said, accomplishments really is the way to define performance.
Right.
And I think because, there are many different ways then that we can use that information. And the simplest way, obviously, is to put it in a job description and define a role that way. But as your model shows, there are many ways that we can leverage that same information. And so that's what we've been able to do at Radcom, which I think has been really, really fun and helpful to our clients. So, we may start with what we call the performance profile, which defines the performance.
Yeah.
But then we've used it internally for recruiting. We've used it, clients have used it for coaching. We've used it for training. We've used it to help define training and design training. For smaller companies, it's a great way to just set expectations and provide feedback. Mm-hmm. So it's very versatile.
Well, one of the things that you've sort of touched on, but I want to highlight is, and also the examples I shared, people have different names for these things.
Mhm.
And I think one of the reasons is that the typical job description is more of a marketing document than anything. It's how we get people in the room to interview them and maybe if they're interested or not. But most job descriptions are useless when it comes to actually setting expectations and managing people. And so, like the example I showed from Alpha Time, the Dubai company, they had a front end of this document that looked kind of like a good conventional job description. But then they had a page which was those outputs and stuff. And so some people make these hybrid things. Or, for example, Shane Isley, I think he named the things that they did for one of their companies performance expectation tools,
Mhm.
or we've been using the phrase job profiles. And so what you call these things is a little bit related to how they're used, and maybe we shouldn't call them job descriptions in some cases because they're so different from. So I think the naming of them and the flexibility of it is quite an interesting thing to explore more.
Yeah, I mean, we've landed on performance profile.
Really.
I think that works for us. And like you said, we have different versions that we use for different things.
Well, and the
But
cool thing is if you start out with what you call a performance profile, then you can say yes, and we can create a lot of things based on the performance profile. So that's kind of like an enabling document for different applications. So I just think getting the language about how we do this clear, especially if we're going to engage other people, like I'm hoping that TD article gets accepted and we may have some more people to engage on this topic, you know.
right, and I think, and that was confusing maybe in the beginning because I was calling them job descriptions, and people have already an idea what a job description is, and it's used more for recruiting and HR, or what we're doing isn't something you necessarily would put out on Indeed when you're looking to hire someone for that role.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have used it internally when we were hiring a new salesperson, because we found that people would join our team and then not really understand what the job is or what they were doing, and then we have some retention issues. Well, once we had those outputs defined, we were able to use those even during that recruiting process
Absolutely.
and show them, like, here are the outputs, here's what we're going to expect you to produce, and not just produce numbers or sales, but the other things that you'll need to produce in the job and what the criteria is and so on. And so it became a really valuable tool in recruiting as well.
I'm reminded of a case that you know about that we use in a different context in our practitioner program. We have this thing we call the tech dev case. It's a real thing from a Korean company, the high-tech company. And so they had these project managers who were basically technical people who knew about how to develop high-tech products, and they managed their teams and they did fancy requirements analyses. Well, it turned out they also had to basically sell their projects. And in their job descriptions, there was no indication that one of the outputs was new customers or anything like that. And so the project, as you know, because you went through the thing a long time ago when you were in the practitioner program, is to say, oh, wait a minute, we need to have job descriptions that tell these people that sales is part of their jobs and there's certain outputs. And you can get into a job and not, like you were saying, you're blind to a lot of the stuff. And then you get it, you say, oh, I didn't know it was that, so you can clarify a lot up front. Okay, well, so then I guess we've already talked a little bit about another thing, which was the different formats and such. So we sort of talked about that a little bit. I'm wondering what, if you think about that little model of talent development that I shared on the screen, and you've seen it before, I'm trying to think about, of the work you've done specifically, which stages in there have you actually done? It's clearly hiring, but if you thought about the applications as stages in the talent development process, what have you experienced so far in terms of applying your stuff?
So I'd say we've definitely done recruiting internally. We've also used it for onboarding internally.
Mm-hmm.
We have used it for performance improvement. One of the things we've also done, so, as performance consultants, we do performance analysis. Mm-hmm. And we had done a few for some clients. And one of the things that seemed to be an issue was you'd go through this analysis, you come up with this great list of recommendations, your findings and recommendations, and then that all takes work. And so, and sometimes it could be a long time before you can actually implement all of those interventions and have the perfect performance system that you're looking for. So we started adding the performance profile as one of the outputs for our performance analysis. And so by doing that, we give them a tangible tool right away that they can use, even at the very least, just to set expectations and feedback.
Yep.
And so the first client that we did that with, they were able to see measurable results within 5 months, where they were looking for their quality number was 83%, and their goal was 96%. So within 5 months, they got up to 93%. And not only did it improve the quality, but it also, they said, improved engagement, efficiency, and setting clear expectations and providing feedback. And so we thought that was a really great example of how powerful performance consulting can be for
So if you look at the quality thing that you mentioned, those were the profile that was involved, or profiles involve outputs in like a process that produced something at the end, and we're talking about the quality of the final product. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, it was a small manufacturing company, and they have a lot of issues with rework. And so the initial ask was, to help improve the performance, but it ended up being so much more. And because we created the performance profiles for them, I actually threw in an hour training, and we had created this guidebook of how to use the profile. So how to use it in recruiting, how to use it to coach, how to use it to set expectations. And so we really gave them more than what they asked for. And the other thing that's really helpful is that when we're doing the profiles, even though maybe it's for career pathing or something else, the process of developing them and interviewing people and talking to them, we easily uncover areas where we can provide recommendations for improvement. So it really does create a lot of value, the process of creating them and then the tool itself.
Yeah, that makes me think of two things. Now we should probably wrap up and do a couple final things. But two things. One is that you're leaving them a map, basically. You're leaving. So even if you died or disappeared or they weren't your client anymore, the fact that you have this concrete set of things that these people need to be able to produce, even if they aren't the performance improvement people that you are, it gives them the thing to try to improve, which is a lot easier than, again, my whipping boy, than saying, we need to improve your strategic thinking. It's about, no, you need to produce this widget to meet spec, or whatever the thing is. So that's a big value add in its own right that they can use. And then the second thing that I was struck by is that you could become, Job Profile Incorporated. There's so much stuff that you're uncovering here. It's really quite exciting, because it seems to me this is an area of expertise. I mean, you're kind of at the cutting edge of doing this stuff, and that's very exciting to me. So just as a final bit, do you have a vision or some thoughts about where this is going to go in your future, how you guys continue to evolve? What are the questions or developments you can envision at this point?
One of the areas that we are starting to move into now more is using it for training design. So the organization with the engineers, they've been a great place to really try out a lot of these things and to expand what we're doing. So we've done profiles for them for 4 departments now, and just added a 5th this week. And I'm now working on using the profiles to design the training. And so you can leverage that information so everything aligns.
Yep.
So that's one area that I'm really excited to start exploring. And then beyond that is how do we integrate coaching into this? So the tool itself and all the performance, consulting and stuff that we can do is great, but I think coaching is another area that I want to.
Yeah, and that's the other point I want to make. we have this coaching program, and
Right.
what we teach coaches to do is create an individual performance map with the person they're coaching. And this is a kind of to me, a subtle thing that we're still trying to figure out, because when I have the conversation with you and we create your performance map and we're having this, we actually create together, I think the process in many ways is as important or more important than the final product, because we're getting alignment on who you deliver value to and what the things are and all that. And we probably learn from each other on both ends. And like you were saying, even if you weren't initially talking about that, you're going to be learning about what tools these people use and what's working and stuff to produce these outputs. And so the big question for me is, I've had a few companies that wanted to create these job descriptions or profiles for every employee, and a few have done it. But I actually think that I don't want to whip out my job profile when I'm coaching you and say, okay, well, this is what they say you're supposed to be able to produce. I actually want to have a conversation with you where we both begin the collaborative discussion about what your outputs are. So what I think is going to be interesting, and I'm hoping you will, when we finish our revision of our virtual based coaching program, you'll become certified to deliver it. But what I think is going to be really interesting is to see how that kind of top down HR thing, which would create some profiles, and how the individual coaching thing that produces your map, how they come together in the middle. And we're in the process of talking with a couple clients about building a software that would do that, so that the coaching process deposits information, which if enough coaches talk to the people in the same role, somebody in HR can look at that and say, let's extract from this the profile for that job, and vice versa. So I think that's an interesting conversation about where the process of alignment around outputs in the conversation and the documentation come together. Does that make sense as a question or a thing to you?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's something that you and I have talked about before.
Yeah.
You know, I'm in a coaching training program right now, and it's more about using it as a tool and not it being the focus. And so you want to have a lot of flexibility around creating change for the coachee, and not necessarily directing everything. So I think there's good and bad to both sides of that. It'd be interesting to see it more in action, to see what really works.
I think there's a lot of opportunities to figure it out. So we got a few minutes left. I wonder, there's been a little bit of vigorous conversation in the chat box. Don, Laurel, Joe's not with us anymore. Ian, any questions you have or comments to what Teresa said or what we've talked about? Because this is the time you can share them. Anybody? I appreciate your comment, Don, about performance profile by name and practice. Focuses and sets expectations on work performance. Yeah. Anybody? Fantastic webinar. Well, of course, we always like to. Oh, good to see you, Gordy. I didn't realize you were with us. Thank you. Gordy's doing a lot of introduction of our coaching program in his client organizations, and so that's kind of cool. Let's see what Don says. Yeah, it's true. Anyway, well, thank you very much. I got a couple more slides I want to share, if that's okay. So I'm gonna disappear myself here and go back to the slides for a moment. And so there's some takeaways just to summarize sort of what we've discussed. You know, we can define jobs with their expected accomplishments, of course. And of course, one of the things that Teresa was talking about was sort of going from the job profiles to training. And I'm reminded of Joe Harless's accomplishment-based curriculum development methodology, which starts with accomplishments and then, goes to tasks and builds training and support for that. This is another way to start with that, which is maybe the client didn't even begin having training in mind. Maybe they just wanted a job profile, but it'll be a great tool for that. And then I think we've said in so many ways that accomplishments make job profiles more actionable and more measurable, certainly than competencies or skills and knowledge even. There's a lot of applications across, and I think we're just discovering them. And we can adopt an accomplishment-based approach to different applications with the templates we create. So part of what I think Teresa's been doing and what some of our clients have done is using these in different ways. The core of it, of course, being the list of outputs and the criteria, but then depends what you're going to do with it, what you add to it. And I'm excited, and as I say, I'm sure hoping that TD Magazine accepts the document that I drafted for them. But this is pretty new. And at least in the mainstream, we've been working with clients to do this for almost a decade now, but this is pretty new. And so we're kind of excited about the future. I want to emphasize, just as this is the shameless commerce moment, we have our performance thinking practitioner program, which, as Therese mentioned, she was a STAR certificate several years ago, and look what's happened since then. Now, to be fair, Dawn, who's in the room here, and a few of her colleagues were big influences on her as well, so I can't take that much credit for this. But if you're interested in our practitioner program, we're just starting a cohort in a week and a half, but the next one will start June 3rd. And for some people, that's summer is better because they don't have as many responsibilities. For some, it's not so good. But you can either point your phone at that QR code, or you can go to Performance Thinking and look in the homepage and learn about that. We've also been creating more free webinar study guides for our webinars. We haven't made any lately, but Ian Patterson, who works with me and who was present here, we're going to start cranking that up again. And if you want to subscribe, point your phone to that QR code, and it will let you download all the current ones, of which I think there's 7 or 8. And then you'll be in our mailing list, and we'll send you, free ones as we get them. And of course, we've been talking about this. We're right now on the threshold of beginning to work with a couple of clients to pilot what will eventually become digital products, application kits, not for all of performance thinking, but for specific applications of it. And so if you want to get on the mailing list for that, to sort of hear about it as it evolves, again, you can point your phone at that QR code and get there. And these are sort of, additional resources. We have a lot of free information and such. I think we already asked if people had comments and questions. One last shot if anybody else has any comments to make. But I just want to thank you, Therese. We talked about doing this for a little while, and I'm so happy that we finally have had the chance to do it. And I'm going to come back, and maybe you will, for a final.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carl. It's always exciting to talk about this stuff with you, and I appreciate, all your coaching and guidance through the years. Like you said, Don was key in that as well, but you've really helped me flourish in this area, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. This is a great example. I'm an old guy now. I've been doing this kind of work on and off for 50 years. And what I'm struck by, once again, is you sometimes I can pass on some stuff that we know about or understand to people, and then they do stuff that I never could have done or would have done. And you're a prime example of that. This is like turned into this fantastic thing that we're going to keep learning from. So thank you.
Thank you
so much. And thanks everybody for showing up, and hope we'll see you next time. So we're out of here, as they say. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.